event. And now we move into the highlight of the evening. Good evening, everyone. Joining us tonight is author, attorney, and exoneree Jarrett Adams. Jarrett was wrongly convicted of a crime he did not commit at age 17 and sentenced to 28 years in a maximum security prison. After serving nearly 10 years and filing multiple appeals, Jarrett was exonerated with the assistance of the Wisconsin Innocence Project. He has since used the injustice he endured as inspiration to become an advocate for the underserved and often uncounted. He earned his JD from Loyola University Chicago School of Law in May 2015 and started a public interest law fellowship with the Honorable Anne Claire Williams, judge for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. Also joining the conversation is attorney and Jarrett's life partner, Joi Thomas Adams. As a lawyer, Joi uses her skills to negotiate and draft scripted, non-scripted, live action, and animated television and film programming. She is also actively involved in the nonprofit world. First as a board member and then as president for more than a decade of the Chicago-based organization Minority Legal Education Resources. Today, she serves as interim executive director and board chair of the nonprofit Life After Justice. Moderating tonight is Friends of the Edgewater Library's resident tech wizard and an essential part of our wonderful communications team, Joanna Broussard. Outside of the volunteer work she does for our organization, Joanna is CEO of the Bismarck Group and is considered one of the most experienced and innovative marketing, communications, and business growth strategists. Premal Daria of Harvard Law School wrote of Jarrett's book, "The intimacy of Adams's writing illustrates the inherent violence of our carceral system in a way that would be impossible without his firsthand experience and without his willingness to share it." We're so glad that he is here tonight to share this story with all of us. Jarrett, welcome. Joanna, I turn the program over to you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, Jarrett. Welcome, Joi. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you ready to get right into it?
I am. And this is like a conversation like the many that we've had already. So I definitely am ready for this.
Okay. So some of our participants may not have read or finished reading your book, Redeeming Justice, From Defendant to Defender, My Fight for Equity on Both Sides of a Broken System. So let me briefly set the stage for the discussion we're going to have tonight. The memoir takes the reader on a journey from a 17-year-old recent high school graduate who ventured out of town with childhood friends to attend a party run by college students. Accused of a crime you did not commit and believing the law would protect you, Jarrett innocently fell into the trap that all too often happens to young men of color. His wrongful conviction due to incompetent representation led to a 28-year sentence at one of the most brutal correctional institutions in Wisconsin. While incarcerated, Jarrett studied his constitutional rights, helped other inmates, and eventually, with the help of the Wisconsin Innocence Project, won his release. And that's just part one of Redeeming Justice. We'll also talk about the aftermath of reclaiming and rebuilding his life after justice and why Jarrett has this intense drive to help other exonerees. Jarrett, let's just get right to this. What advice would you give to young people of color who find themselves in a situation with law enforcement where they know they are innocent, but they feel trapped and they have no idea what to do?
I mean, I would give them the advice that is the hardest to take and to do, and that is to say nothing until you have proper representation. I mean, kids are in a special class for a reason, and that's because of the studies support the maturation of the brain, like just overall decision making. You know, when you're a kid, and so it's in these communities of color that I came from, South Side of Chicago. We're not taught anything past you do what the police say, or you do what the authorities say, or you respect your elders. And where you have the police and community relations not the greatest, that isn't the best advice, you know, and it's not, John, it's not indicative of an entire police force or an entire community. This is us speaking about facts and numbers. And when you look at the facts and the numbers, mainly the prison system is made up of kids of color who come from these poorest communities in which I'm speaking of, that I came from. And so that's why, unfortunately, kids of color need to be taught their constitutional rights along with their ABCs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jarrett, how do you do that?
Mhm.
How do you impress upon a young person of color that they have constitutional rights and they need to be aware of what 3 or 4 key critical things? How do you get them to understand that?
Well, here's what I'll say. I'm not sure if this will work, but why not? Because nothing else is right now, right?
Yeah.
What I mean by that is this. We saw a war on drugs infiltrate and obliterate the Black community with crack cocaine and stuff like that, and then the laws that came behind it. So as a result, you saw this tough on crime, this move to give a lot of resources for lock people up. What happened? We got, to mass incarceration. So now what I want to see is this. Someone go show me a war on the educational system in these areas, a war on childcare so mothers can take care of their kids while going to school to better themselves, to improve their environment and everything else. Where's the war on the jobs, the training, and things like that? If you oversaturate a kid with enough positiveness and opportunity, chances are they'll choose to go one of those routes, as opposed to the what you see on the news, especially in Chicago. So I think that it's a concerted effort to dump as many resources as we can, because in quoting Frederick Douglass, and this might not be a word for word quote, it is easier for us to invest in our kids than it is to repair a lot of what's going on right now in our communities. So we have to start bright and early with our kids, investing in the education, the knowledge about what their rights are, because I'm guilty of that. I knew every lyric to Tupac's 1998 double CD, but I knew nothing at all in terms of a constitutional right that would have afforded me the opportunity to not say anything until I had an attorney.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jarrett, while you were in prison, you just talked about, being able to have supportive parents and supportive family network. While you were in prison, you had a great support network. Your mother and your aunts continued to support you and believe in you. Can you sort of tell us what they did to help and what that did for you as you went through this process?
Yeah, I mean, they were a lifeline and a graveyard for me. The prison, make no mistakes about it. The worst movie that you've seen depicting how prison is, it pales in comparison to how it really is in there. And so this is in a graveyard, in my opinion, where people are maybe have a heartbeat, but their souls, their hope, everything has died in this place, and the conditions are not such that it could bring any hope. And so I had them on a rotating basis, sending letters, coming up to try to see me, making sure my aunt Josephine, her name is Sugar for folks who've read the book. She would get me a newspaper subscription, and the newspaper would come to Wisconsin like about a day late. And I told her, I'm like, look, this is a lot of money you're paying for this subscription. Why, you don't have to do it. They get here a day late anyway. And so she's like, no, I know I don't have to do it, but I'm doing it for a reason. I said, well, what? Why? She says, look, baby, they got your body. We can never let them confine your mind. You have to read to be able to take yourself. So when I think about these three women, and I'm like, look, I'm accused of a sexual assault, okay? And so to have three women who've raised me all my life, if nothing else, I just wanted them to know who they raised, right? So
Sure.
For them, they didn't question me or anything like that. And so their support and their love for me was, we're gonna do this, in a way that we're gonna brace ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And there's some prayerful women, and they just believe that, look, God is most certainly at play here. We don't know what all is going on, but we're gonna sit in the car and not try to change the destination and believe. And that faith, it made me believe, because look, I was raised in the church. When I was going through this, somebody had to tell me there was a God again, because I couldn't believe why would I go through this? But what I learned through this experience was my faith was learned. It wasn't earned yet. So I grew up in the church. I'm in the choir, Sunday school. It was learned, but it was never earned. And through this test of faith, I felt like it was earned.
Yeah. Yeah. Jarrett, you said something interesting. You talked about prison feeling like a graveyard. And that's pretty demoralizing, to recognize that you're sort of stuck in here. So at what point in this process, while you were in prison, did you realize that you actually had to sort of take things into your own hands and do something to change your situation? At what point did you realize that? And then tell me what you did.
Right. I just even thinking back, I think about how close I came to not having the opportunity to bring my claim of innocence. And I'm celled up with the older white guy who had been in prison, for years. And he had, 2 life sentences, so he wasn't going anywhere. So I remember there was a violent incident that took place in the prison. And whenever something happens in these prisons, they'll lock everything down, and then they will investigate to see if there's a riot or something like that. And I remember it was the first time that me and him really got a chance to interact. And so he was going through, my transcripts, like my paperwork, because I was on the phone with my mom, and I was trying to explain to my mom, and she would patch in my aunts on like a 5-way back then. I'm still surprised no one hung the phone up on us, but she would be on the phone and she would patch in, my aunts, and I would try my best with my limited, public high school education to explain the legal conundrum that I found myself in. I was doing a horrible job. And so my cellmate overheard and was like, look, let me look at what's going on in your case. He looked, and he's like, he comes back after a while, a couple of days has passed, and he's like, look, each and every day you get up and you go play basketball, you go play chess, you work out. I mean, you act like you're on a country club resort or something. You don't act like an innocent person. I've never in my life seen a case like this, where someone is just accused of something and gets 28 years with no supporting evidence, and there were plenty of witnesses to be called. So he started to point out certain things. I started to write letters, and I ended up, painstakingly teaching myself the law, because I was a tutor in the law library at one point. I made a couple deals with folks to use their typewriters, drafted a letter where I left the name and a date blank, and I would mail out letters every week asking for help. And so I got help from one attorney in Wisconsin, a guy by the name of Rob Hennick. And Rob Hennick was a post-conviction attorney. I wrote him a long letter, and I told him, I'm like, look, my family, we can't afford you, but I'm reaching a deadline. And if you would agree to edit this, then, I would be much appreciative. He responded, and he agreed to edit it, for like a smaller fee, nowhere near close to what he could have gotten. And his edits helped me to perfect what got the attention of the Wisconsin Innocence Project.
Okay. Let's talk about the Wisconsin Innocence Project. You served 10 years of a 28-year sentence.
Yes.
You filed multiple appeals. Rob helped you with that, with the really big one. You were ultimately exonerated with the help of the Wisconsin Innocence Project. So tell us a little bit about the Wisconsin Innocence Project. I know it's part of a larger network that
Yeah.
is called the Innocence Project. And then on what grounds were you ultimately exonerated?
So the Wisconsin Innocence Project, they came and they saw me, two students and a professor, Keith Finman. And so the way that it's set up is it's set up as a clinical program inside of a college. This clinical program takes on pro bono cases of actual innocence, where people can meet the standard, then they take on these claims. So the complexities of my case involve another co-defendant. That co-defendant had all of his charges dismissed when from prison I wrote a letter to his attorney to find a witness. Come to find out, what we already knew from the beginning was the police had withheld a statement that really refuted everything we were accused of that night. And so we got the statement. The charges were dismissed against the co-defendant, and inexplicably, people will have to go through the book to read the details. The prosecutor had the opportunity to reverse our conviction and let us out. Me and my other co-defendant would have been in prison only for about 2 years at that point. He made us go the long way. And ultimately, the Wisconsin Innocence Project picked up my case, argued it all the way to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, where the Second Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously, I say that again, unanimously, on a 3-panel judge, reversed my conviction based on the statement that was withheld by the police, and their argument that my attorney should have discovered this because some of it was in the record. So it's an out-of-body experience, because when you're here in a place as dark as this prison, a lot of people believe that our time must go slow. Well, actually it doesn't. And that's the scary thing, because one Christmas turned into 4, 5, and 6 before I ever had the opportunity of seeing a light at the end of this tunnel.
Yeah.
And so I paused at the beginning to answer that question, because I just think even writing the book and writing that section in the book, it was terrifying, because if it would have been just a couple more weeks without hearing from the Innocence Project, I literally would have been released from prison in February of 2020, after serving 20-something years in prison for a crime I did not commit. And not because I was guilty, but because I missed the procedural deadline.
Yeah. So there's, and there's lots of that kind of stuff that happens because people in prison, if they can't afford an attorney, or they had a public defender who didn't do their homework, the procedural deadlines alone could keep them bound forever.
And forever. Jonah, and the thing about it is this: it was many ways that this book could have been written, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wasn't going to do was have a book that just talked about nothing but my accomplishments. Like, that wasn't, that wouldn't, I had to find a way to hide the peas in the applesauce, so to speak. And so through the story, I'm telling you about how the law works for indigent, poor people.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a perception that if you're arrested or if you're accused, then you had to be doing something. And if you don't come out of it, then, well, you had to do it. Well, let me tell you this: 80%, if not higher, of our public relies on the public defense system. Yeah. Public defenders are managing caseloads that if I, as a private attorney, did, I would be disbarred, because there's no way you can manage a caseload like that. Then once you get found guilty, after your first direct appeal, you get no more lawyers afforded to you unless you reach a certain standard. So literally, a person in that predicament is left to fend for themselves and go pro se, which is the predicament that I was in until I was able to get Rob Hennick and get, you know, the Innocence Project. So make no mistakes about it.
Yeah.
Although I was able to get to where I am, there is not a day that goes by that I am not cognizant of how fortunate I am.
Yeah. Yeah. You used a term just now called pro se.
Mm-hmm.
Would you just very briefly explain that for people who in the audience who are not lawyers?
Pro se, pro bono, pro per, they all mean I do not have money to be able to afford my representation. And, you know, there's a reason why there was a case, the Supreme Court passed the law in Gideon that there be an attorney present for everyone dealing with what makes us Americans, which is our freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that ruling did not take into effect that not every lawyer is a lawyer that needs to be practicing in this area, in this field.
Yeah, yeah. Jarrett, when you were 27 years old when you were released,
Mm-hmm.
did you come back to Chicago following your release?
I did. I had no family at all in Wisconsin, so I came right back home, and home was like, it's like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. Were you able to return to what I'm going to call a normal life? What was that like?
There is no normalcy in just imagine this, 1998. You didn't have cell phones like that. If you had cell phones back in 1998, you had a 007 briefcase, you know, and if you did have a cell phone, it was as long as your arm, the antenna was as long as your leg, and you know, it was not what you think it was. People still had pagers. When I got home, I still had a pager left in my property, right? So it was like, you know, there were no cell phones. There was no Google. Google wasn't around. There was no email in 1998 when I was incarcerated. There were no text messages or things like that. Literally, the dawn of the new age took place while I was incarcerated for something that I did not do.
When you were released, you know, I know many people see the big stories when somebody gets released, and then you see, oh, he got $24 million for the 22 years he served in prison and blah, blah, blah. Were you compensated for your 10 years?
I got nothing at all. They literally, because there is 80%, 90% of the people, once they're wrongfully convicted and get out, are not successful on civil suits because of immunity. A lot of people are immune from civil suits. And so for me, I only had a limited number of people I could come after, and the main person was my attorney, and he didn't have malpractice insurance. So it was literally one of these things where I was stuck with the most invaluable thing that I could have had, and that was my youth. I had an opportunity. You know, most of the people who go through what I went through, they come home at the age of retirement with nothing to retire on. I had my youth and the encouragement of my family to go to mental health care, because they're like, look, we're mad. We are mad. So we know you should be mad, but all you're trying to do is work and catch up for 10 years. That is impossible. So it was through that encouragement of getting the mental health care, and just being downright, I was downright angry. I was upset.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
You know, it's what you do with that. You know, anger can either drive you as the fuel to get you where you want to go, or it can be the petrol that burns up your entire dreams.
Yeah. So essentially, the state of Wisconsin didn't feel like they owed you anything. So you got no compensation whatsoever.
None of that. Every state has their own compensation laws, and they have literally the worst in amongst the states. They are one of the worst.
Mm-hmm. And again, since you were exonerated, usually when people come out of prison, there is some kind of social service or something available to them to try to help them transition back into day-to-day life. What happens? It's different for an exoneree, isn't it?
It's extremely different because we're in a class that's not, there's no subject matter for our class that's acknowledged, by our criminal justice system. And so, when people come out from convictions in which they discharge out of prison or they're paroled or released on some type of supervision, they have services. Now they aren't the best, but parole or probation services, job readiness programs, things like that. When I came home, I didn't have anything. And in fact, I remember getting involved with the program to show you how to use like Microsoft Word and Yahoo. This is when Yahoo email was the stuff back then. You didn't have Yahoo or Hotmail. So, I was in this program learning how to do things with the computer and navigate. And I remember like just being called into, the office, and they're like, listen, you stick around for the rest of the day, but we can't like offer the program to you in its full capacity because, and I'm like, what do you mean? They said, well, listen, our grant is tied to the number of convicted felons that we help with our money. Like we can't help. So we looked you up, you don't have a record. So I was taken aback by that, but it let me know just how much of a gray area it is and how the system very rarely will acknowledge its deficiencies. And this was one, a glaring one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it just sounds crazy.
Yeah.
It really sounds, it does, it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
They've taken 10 years of your life and you come out with nothing. So, Jarrett, a lot of people have been exonerated. Tell me, what made you decide to write this book?
The practice of law. It's just not. I wish many people could see what I saw on a day-to-day basis. So, I wanted to write the book to give you the bird's eye view. And I remember thinking when I got out that I wanted to get this law degree, and getting this law degree would be some type of force field or something like that. And I would be able to go in and go fix, all the things that ill the system. Then I got the law degree and I started to practice, and I saw the same things that were taking place back when I, was wrongfully convicted. And it just scared me. It scared me into doing what I'm doing now, which is this. Not one lawyer is going to change this. We have to equip our kids, the next generation, with the knowledge to make the best decisions. And I'm not saying that everyone is going to agree with what I believe needs to be done with the criminal justice system. But what I am saying is we need to have healthy, real conversations about the truth about our justice system. Yeah. And we can't be the greatest nation and its greatest incarcerator at the same time. We can't be the greatest humanitarian in the world, but the greatest incarcerator of a country that, when you combine Poland and all of these number of different countries, they still don't make up how many people we have incarcerated. And so I think that what we have to do is we have to give the unfiltered version of our country's history. The derivative of our country's history is our criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And that is the history of slavery. That is the history of Jim Crow laws. That is, if you look right now today, Joanna, look, you've heard about bond reform so much, right?
Yeah.
You know why? Because when the criminal justice system was created, litigated, and thought out, the people thinking it out didn't have a problem putting up bond, right?
Yeah.
That's why you see a system now that disproportionately impacts people who cannot afford bond, yet they still remain what? Innocent until proven guilty. The numbers have showed that people who can't afford bond during their proceedings are more likely to be found guilty. So again, that's just one example of what I mean by this country has advanced with infrastructure, technology, science, but we refuse to allow those same advancements to make us better in our criminal justice system and how we treat people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. The bond issue is very interesting, and that's particularly impacts women because they typically are not in the same economic situation that a man might be. And so there's literally thousands of women who are languishing in jails that have not even been to trial because they can't afford bond.
Women's population of prison is on the rise, and no one is really looking at it right now.
Yeah, I saw that in some research I was doing. And speaking of women, it's time to invite Joi to come back in and play with us for these last couple of questions, because we want to hear about what she's doing, because the two of you make a great team in lots of different ways, but when it comes to this topic, Joi and Jarrett are a real powerhouse together. Welcome back, Joi.
Hello.
So this is kind of a question for both of you. The injustice within our legal system makes wrongful convictions more common than people realize. So I'm curious, and I think most people are, how often does this happen? And what makes it possible for our system to put innocent individuals in prison?
Well, let's talk about the numbers for a second, right? Because I feel like this helps put it in context. So with the Innocence Project, right, they have their estimates that if you look at the current population of prisoners, right, it's anywhere between 2 to 3% are actually innocent people sitting there. Now, if you look at other scholars on the subject, they actually increase that all the way up to 10%, right? So that's just the idea of who was actually innocent sitting in prison. And if you think about the fact that, as Jarrett was pointing out, we incarcerate more people than there are in actual countries, that is pretty terrifying. It's an epidemic. But then let's look at the actual numbers around those who have been exonerated. The National Registry of Exoneration that is housed and supported by the University of Michigan, they've been tracking these numbers since 1989. And I mentioned that first, just so everyone kind of has context with that too, is that these numbers I'm going to share with you are only from that point forward, but does not mean that it captures the whole entire population of those who have been exonerated. But as far as their tracking, you're looking at nearly, as of 2022, 3,000 individual men and women, as we were talking about, like the women population, have been exonerated. But again, I would like to emphasize that is those who have self-identified. Exoneration, those people who have been wrongfully convicted and then released, come in all different shapes and forms. And I defer to Jarrett on the legalities of those types of things, right? Because as Joanna pointed out, I do entertainment law, he handles the criminal stuff. But if you look at those 3,000 individuals that have been identified and tracked, right? Over nearly 27,000 years have been lost, because on average, we are quick to convict, but we will not let these individuals out after on the average of 8 to 9 years. So, and most of this is in decades, and most of these individuals are coming home at the age of retirement after spending decades in prison to nothing and no resources, right? So, in this system, just if you think about, Jared gives this analogy all the time, and you think about a car manufacturer, right? If there was one issue to be recalled, you're talking about fleets of cars coming back, right? And we have this record with our criminal justice system that our taxpayer dollars pay for, and we're getting it wrong. And the impact of getting it wrong is catastrophic.
So Joi, you mentioned that it could be as high as 10%. I think a lot of people probably don't know that there's about 2.4 million people incarcerated in this country. So roughly that could be as many as 240,000 people who are innocent, who are still sitting in prison.
Easily. Now, again, these are just estimates.
Exactly.
And again, what focusing on wrongful convictions and exonerations, that is just, to me, the tip of the iceberg. There are so many cracks and issues with our system as to why people are sitting in prison for all of the wrong reasons. And again, I don't think anyone is saying whether or not this is even a conversation about guilty versus, as far as people paying for crimes they commit. We're talking about when we get it wrong. And there's statistics to show we do.
Yeah.
So in that conversation, what are we doing?
Sure. So one of the things that I want to just sort of take people and why Joi's here tonight is because Jarrett's story inspired his memoir, obviously, and it has also been a driving force for Jarrett and several other exonerees to create an organization, a nonprofit organization called Life After Justice. And then Jarrett married Joi. And so Joi has really picked the ball up on Life After Justice and has really been a driving force behind getting this nonprofit really started and operating. Jarrett's realization that he could not fix a broken system by himself is where Life After Justice comes in. Again, Life After Justice is a 501c3 nonprofit. And basically what it does is it battles injustice and supports wrongfully convicted exonerees by empowering them to reclaim their lives. And the focus is, Joi and Jarrett put Life After Justice together based on Jarrett's experience and how he came out and what he did afterwards. So it also encompasses not only some strategic litigation pieces, but it also encompasses the holistic mental health services, because that's a real battle once you are actually released. So Joi, talk to me a little bit about the 3 prongs of Life After Justice and what it's designed to do.
Right. I think that what's the most important thing to start with Life After Justice is that we are an exoneree created and led organization. What was very important to Jarrett and I was that we are putting the people most impacted in power to be a part of the solution. And I think that's very important in these spaces, particularly when we're having conversations about criminal justice reform, right? And so as you were saying, like the 3 buckets that we focus on came from Jarrett's experience, but also the collective voices of the exoneree leadership that form our board and are part of the conversations and inform of what our work is, right? And from that, we have, as you mentioned, the clear first bucket of strategic litigation. We exist as an organization within a larger ecosystem of innocence work, right? The Innocence Project, I call it the mothership, originally founded by Barry Scheck and Peter Newfield, that gave birth to an innocence network of over 60 organizations that do phenomenal, amazing litigation work to free the innocent. So when we were thinking about what we were going to do as an organization was to how do we add value? And that's putting Jarrett's legal skills to particular cases that focus primarily on non-DNA cases, because they're the hardest cases to get someone to accept, and that they are helping us to push forward not only just freedom, but the type of legislation and legal changes that need to happen to eradicate wrongful conviction, because that's possible. The 5 common known reasons for exonerations are things that are fixable. Understanding better about junk science that are locking people away, misidentification of witnesses, these things that can have solutions to, right? So that's what our strategic, we're taking a handful of cases, Jarrett's leading those efforts so that we are able to free, but also to prevent other people from being wrongfully convicted. Our middle bucket is the economic advocacy, because that was around when you were asking Jarrett about the fact that he's never been compensated, and the fact that these people are snatched from their communities and their lives for decades, and then it's like, poof, there you go back. Good luck with it, right? So with economic advocacy, we're really pushing the conversation around the states have to be responsible for these individuals, full stop. They should be responsible for the economic support of them putting their lives together and the decades of economic growth that they are missed out on. All types of social services, education, health. So the states need to be put in responsibility for these individuals. This is not from one organization, one taxpayer's good donation to solve. And so we want to change the conversation around that. Not all 50 states and the federal government have equal compensation. Some states have none. Some states have what they might as well be invisible, like in Wisconsin. So we are working in partnership with Innocence Project to bring these issues in from, like I said, the voice of the Exoneree. As the executive director, I am married to Exoneree, and I'm the conduit of all of these thoughts and drive to do this. But at the end of the day, it is our Exoneree and our Exoneree leadership that are leading these efforts. Our last bucket, which is most important, and Jarrett brought this up earlier, when people commonly ask him, like, how is it that he's able to do what he does today? And he points to the early intervention of mental health care. From Life After Justice perspective, we are a holistic healing organization. In order for anyone to even think about putting their lives together, we have to think about restoring them as individuals. That's where your power comes from. We cannot ignore the damage that this, and Jarrett says this all the time, the car wreck that happens when you go into the criminals, into these prison systems. No one comes unharmed out of that. And not just the individual exonerees, the men and women, but their families. You know, I'm a family member of someone who was incarcerated, and that had an impact on my life and what I do today, right? And where is the support for those individuals and their families, more important? And their families are most likely left out of the conversation, and particularly women. The majority of women, when they're wrongfully convicted, they are convicted in crime connected to child abuse or child death. And they're ripped away from their family, they're ripped away from raising their kids and all these different things that are very particular to a woman's journey. Where is that type of holistic support to put their lives back together? So with Life After Justice, we're focused on building a holistic ecosystem of specially trained therapists to match to our exonerees and their families, and start building that foundation back and empowering them. Not just saying, you know, we're sorry this happened to you, but here are the tools to make sure that you can take control of your life again and rebuild it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Joi, you talked a little bit about Jarrett working on some cases. I know one that you're working on right now is the Waverly case. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about, between you and Jarrett, how it connects from Jarrett in his law practice and Jarrett working for Life After Justice to find these cases where we can set new legal precedents and really change the way the law is written.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll defer to Jarrett for that.
Well, I was gonna say, I'm working for free if that's what you asked. No, but yeah. so I, look, I'm, my law practice is mainly doing civil. I am starting to do, like companies are hiring my firm to do investigations. So I'm able to bring in, monetarily there. But oh my God, listen, I don't care how tough I get, how tough I am. These voicemails and these emails from these mothers, if I could just let you listen to some of them, you would do the same thing that I'm doing. We're trying to figure out how to help people, but not kill yourself, right? So it was like the pandemic gave me and Joi the opportunity to reboot, and for her to take the reins on getting the nonprofit organized and stuff, so that way I was able to help. So now what I do is this: I've been going through these inquiries, right? And there's also the cases that I funded like for years, like just funded on my own, because I could not sleep knowing when you get a case where you've went through all the evidence. Nah, you can't sleep. You can't. So I moved towards identifying the cases that weren't just cases of wrongful convictions and overturning, but how could I go from this is a case, wrongfully convicted, we're able to get him out, but now we go create some legislation that creates precedent that keeps this from happening. And that's the important part. We've seen the pizza parties and the jovial moments, right? How do we go from that to very rarely are we talking about a wrongful conviction? We used to talk very rarely about wrongful convictions because we didn't want to acknowledge that our system could get it wrong. Now we need to get back to talking rarely about them, but now because they rarely happen.
Yeah. So I want to invite Jane to join us again, because I would like to take some questions from the audience.
Yes, well, we've had a few. Thank you, everyone, for that conversation. It was really riveting. we've had a number of questions from the audience, so I'm going to turn to these. Jarrett, after you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you could go into more detail. After your ordeal in prison mentally, how have you been able to overcome your experience?
It's through the therapy. Look, I had some really grounded family, you know, like I tell people all the time, you know, if you expect me to get up and start talking about how I was in the streets and I was gang banging and turning my life around, no, my grandmother was about 4'10", but had a big stick behind the front door, and two people better not knock on that door looking for the kids, the police and the school system, okay? So we were raised in such a way where it was like my grandmother reminded all of the grandkids, including her kids, which was my mom and my aunts and uncle, that it took a lot for them to sacrifice to get them out of the cotton fields in Mississippi. And so we had opportunity that we should not waste. With that was the constant talking and having conversations about what's healthy, and mental health care in my family, you know, was talked about. And so it was one of these things where I was fortunate to have that strong structure. And through that, I also acknowledged how valuable that strong structure is and how we've allowed certain things in our society to deteriorate the structure of the Black family with the war on drugs and stuff like that. So, I mean, I didn't have a choice, Jane, to answer your question. Like, my mom and my aunts were not gonna let me not go make sure that I was okay.
That's great. That's very good. Because quite often that's the mental health piece is the part that's the hardest for people to talk about. So it's good to hear that you had a family that really supported that. What does a person need when facing prison when they can't afford an attorney and when all they have is a court-appointed attorney?
You need Jesus. That's what you need, okay? You need to not rely on the person that's appointed to you, and you should actively participate in your own representation. And I'm not saying be co-counsel or not let the attorney not do his job, but engage in the case as best you can to help. And that starts by, you know, something that will be music to this audience ears: reading, the library, the internet. There isn't a question you can't answer nowadays. And so I think that it's for us to not just let the understanding of law be left to the lawyers and judges and court system.
Someone in our audience, Susan, asked, she may have missed this, but how did you first come in contact with Wisconsin Innocence Project?
I saw them all over the news in Wisconsin, and actually they were overturning, you know, the conviction of Stephen Avery in Wisconsin. So they were doing good work, but it was something that was so rare. Again, you know, 1999, 2000, you know, you didn't see the news segments of wrongful convictions on a regular basis because we weren't acknowledging it. So it was one of these things where I knew that I couldn't afford an attorney, and I knew that the best chance I had was not pro se. It was with someone representing me. And it would be great if the name of that company or that entity was called the Innocence Project. And so I was just committed to getting their attention.
Then we have one more question here from the audience. Do you think that there is something that state's attorneys should be doing better with their cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there needs to be a separate entity created that does not allow the prosecutors to be the strongest piece on the chessboard of the criminal system. You know, you're not gonna get, rarely are you gonna get someone to look under their own hood and say, yeah, I messed this up, you know? So what we have to do is we have to take that pressure, and nor is it reasonable, in my opinion, to believe that, you know, some figurehead or some prosecutor can be able to fix the ills of the system that the system itself needs to fix. And I think that where we can encourage and require prosecutors to do something, I think that what we can do is take it right out of their hands, because look how uncomfortable this is. You tell me another relationship, working relationship, that is tighter than the police and the prosecutor. And I'll tell you, the only one I know of is a doctor and nurse. I don't know of anyone else who works. So if you know that an officer isn't telling the truth or some wrongdoing is happening in this case, but you need to call Officer Jones in another case where you know you got the right bad guy, that can be uncomfortable. That is a conflict that we have not addressed, and we have to do it. We have to not expect prosecutors' offices to do what we as taxpayer dollars should demand.
So kind of the flip side of this, and this is my own question, I want to preface that. I know someone who was in the Navy JAG Corps who did defense work, and it was important to him to go in and do defense work just because of that. You have the full weight of the United States government coming at you. Yes. And that's very awesome. That's an awesome, awesome weight coming at you. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of a rigorous legal defense?
It's paramount, because how often do we look at a computer, look at an image or look at a telecast of someone doing what we know in America is called the perp walk, and we don't ask what they've been accused of. We ask what did they do? And so we have to acknowledge that, first of all, the public defense system isn't broken. It was never working. It was never working. You have public defenders who are managing so many cases. You have the personnel who is completely overwhelmed, and you have people that I met in prison that when I reviewed their cases, I was appalled that they were pleading guilty. But then I was humbled when they said, Jarrett, what was I supposed to do? If I didn't plead guilty, I would have lost my job. That job was how I fed my kids. I just wanted to get out and I couldn't afford a bond. It is so heartbreaking to think that a lot of the narratives that we get are not complete. And there are so many times where our justice system will make people seem as if they were born at the scene of their accusation or arrest. And it is simply not true.
It's a very good point. It's really, it's a lot to think about. You've given us a lot to think about here. I have two more questions from our audience. And the first one is, Missouri's Kevin Strickland situation was beyond reason with no compensation after 40 years also. Can the compensation aspect minimally be addressed, do you think?
It has to be. And this is one of the beautiful things that we're going to be doing with our organization. So in the legal department, I am actively building a table of folks to do research, to help come up with the litigation that creates a class action suit on behalf of those who have been wrongfully convicted, who literally come home to nothing, right? And what that does is that takes us out of the realm of please do this to we are legally demanding that this be done, because if not, you are endangering the community. You have men and women being released, and sometimes you're asking a person to be released and you're telling them, well, go home. There is no home, and their family, and many times people are the last remaining leaf on their entire family tree. These are the stories that don't make it into the news articles when people convict. When Kevin Strickland his conviction was reversed, everyone was so ecstatic that he was out, but no one was considering that he wouldn't be compensated. He would literally be reliant on a wheelchair most of the time to get around. And he is visiting grave sites for his family members. He doesn't have a home to go to. So now the lawyers who got him out went from being his advocate, his attorney, to social workers, and probably roommates right now. And we shouldn't allow our system to displace people like that.
And I would like to also add here is that there needs to be a larger conversation on the taxpayer side, because I, as a taxpayer, pay a lot of money for the individuals that we wrong convicted in the state. I pay a lot of money for when the prosecutors still want to fight to keep them in there, right? but there's no conversation about where is those tax dollars going when these individuals are coming home, because we should be a part of that conversation as well, because we're essentially paying for this. And when those settlements come down from the state, we're paying for those as well. So this is an economic problem for everyone, no matter how you fall on the side of the coin.
That is so true, Joi. And I'm going to, Joi, turn the last question over to you. You touched a little bit about the toll that this takes on families of prisoners and exonerees. What kinds of supports would you like to see in place? Can you give us some examples of things that you would have found helpful, and what you think other people would find helpful to help build these lives back together?
I think that I go back to the center for everything to me is holistic healing. I wish that there was more support offered for in the mental health and the holistic support system in that capacity. Like, where are the support systems for the family to have the conversation about how is it to have your loved one coming back home and transitioning? How do you support them? How do you deal with the emotions that you have dealt with for decades of having your loved one who you know was innocent being the victim, frankly, of this horrible prison system? Mentally, emotionally, and sometimes physically, that takes a toll. Like, you're not imprisoned with your loved one, but you are just as much incarcerated every single day. I can't tell you like what it was, the heartbreak to, and understanding Jarrett's situation and, reflecting on my own. I could not imagine for his mother, his family members to go visit him and leave him in one of the worst prisons in America, knowing he didn't belong there and what they were just powerless. That is something, that type of holistic healing should be a right to the individuals impacted in this sort of situation.
Well, it's time for us to say goodnight to everybody, but this has been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation tonight, and I hope other people in the audience have felt the same way as I have. There's a lot to unpack here and a lot to think about, and I think this will stay with us for days. I just want to remind our viewers to take a last look at the information in the chat, especially if you wish to purchase the book, Redeeming Justice, online from Barbara's bookstore. The information about purchasing is all in there. Someone just quickly put in a comment, how can they access the recording of this? It will be on the Friends website probably within a week. That is www.foelchicago.org, and we'll have that up there, and you'll be able to check this out and look at it again. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. Tonight we just sort of ran out of time, but I thank you all for coming. Many thanks to the audience for stopping by here tonight. Thank you to Jarrett and Joi for giving your time to us all this evening. This was a really important conversation to have, and thank you, Joanna, for moderating the conversation. It was really robust. And good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.